It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the Flight Deck. And of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future. And this segment, we're going to be talking about a very, very interesting subject, one that has been on our minds for quite a while. A new term, not all terribly new, but relatively new, thing called whistleblowing. And we're going to be talking to an expert. His name is William Binney. Who is William Binney? He is a former high-level National Security Agency intelligence official. He is very concerned about your civil liberties. He's very concerned about human rights. He's also very, very concerned about the entire subject of spying, so to speak, on you and intelligence that's being found out about you. He is heading up a very interesting organization called Exposed Facts. It was launched earlier, and we welcome to Lewis at Large, William Binney. William, how are you?
Oh, fine. Thank you very much for having me here.
By the way, are you Bill or William? What do you prefer?
Bill's fine.
Okay, Bill. Let's do this. Let's do a little bit better setup than that for our Lewis at Large listeners, and share with us, if you would, your background in intelligence and what led you to the National Security Agency.
Well, initially I got into the National Security Agency through the Army. I basically I came out of school, and they were going to take me in the Army, so I thought I'd volunteer. So when they did aptitude testing, you know, like they do in the Army, you get a whole battery of aptitude tests. They say, you really have an aptitude for this particular area of analysis. And they said, we think you belong in intelligence, so they put me in intelligence. And from there, I went into, I was deployed to Turkey, and I was there for a while, for a year and a half, and then I came back to NSA, because in the intelligence it was the signals intelligence, so that was affiliated with NSA. So they shipped me back to serve over here the last part of my tour at NSA, and from there I converted as a civilian. So, basically, I was looking at the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, you know, the big evil empire, and doing analysis of codes and ciphers and data systems and things like that against that particular set of targets.
What I'm very curious, in your career in the intelligence agency and just in your entire career of service, did your attitude towards those agencies and their missions and the work they were doing change dramatically?
It did in at least one aspect, and that was when NSA, whose charter has been to do foreign intelligence, not domestic intelligence, and when they started after 9/11 to focus on compiling information on every citizen in the United States, that's when I basically parted company with them, because that was not the charter. And that's not the function of a democracy to spy on its population. After all, it's one of the founders. The whole principle of the founding of this country was based on the people should know what the government's doing. The government should not know what the people are doing. That is, you have the freedom and rights to be free in your association and your private life and all of your activities. So when the government started looking at people as opposed to having people look at government, that was a total change in the foundation, what the founders of our country set up here to begin with. I mean, even Ronald Reagan, when he said, when he was president, he said, we are a country with a government. Well, over that period of time, since then, we've evolved to be a government with a country.
You were long a critic of President Bush, the administration, and ultimately your home was raided, I believe, by the FBI, but 5 to 7 years ago or so. Tell us a little bit about all that.
Yeah, they raided us in 26th of July of 2007. And it was because we were working internally in the government, going to the intelligence committees and other members of Congress and the inspector generals of the Department of Defense and Department of Justice, trying to get them to follow the Constitution and basically live up to their oath of office and defend it and stop these procedures of domestic spying. So that was why the FBI was sent at us because we became too noticed in government, and they wanted to get rid of us that way and shut us up. So they sent the FBI at us, and then they sent the DOJ at us to try to trump up charges against us. They fabricated evidence and tried to indict us 3 separate times. And in each case, though, we had, being good intelligence officers, we were backed up and had all the evidence ourselves, and so we had, in effect, we had the evidence of malicious prosecution on the part of the Department of Justice, and so they dropped all those charges against us, but they kept trying, with Tom Drake, they kept trying to prosecute him, again, with fabricated evidence. They falsified evidence, but they got caught in court. That's why their whole case fell apart.
You know, as a former high-level official at the National Security Agency, undoubtedly you saw the value and probably many times life-saving, if not intelligence-saving work that they did in a good way, so to speak, on behalf of the citizens of the country. You also saw abuse, and I'm curious as to, it must be a funny double-edged sword, the feelings that you have and your whole perspective on national security.
Yeah, it really is kind of a contradictory set of circumstances when you think the agency, for example, the NSA and other intelligence agencies, they really have a proper place in intelligence in around the world, and it's most, of course, as long as it's domestic or it has related terrorist activity or dope smuggling activity internally in the country. There are legitimate applications for that, and as long as they stick to that, they're doing a public service by all means. And the vast majority of people there do that. There's a subset of them, though, who are involved in this domestic spying. That is the real problem.
Well, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. We're talking to Bill Binney. He is a former high-level National Security Agency intelligence official. For this discussion, a new organization called Expose Facts. It is all about whistleblowing. It is all about trying to protect you, your privacy, and your rights as American citizens, coming from a very, very interesting perspective. Let's, the domestic spying, domestic intelligence gathering, you think of, unfortunately or unfortunately, you think of J. Edgar Hoover. You think of the break-in on Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist office via the Watergate and all those things issued and those issues around Watergate and some of the more famous domestic spying. This is really not a new issue, is it, Bill?
No, it's not. In fact, this goes way back. I mean, the Shamrock program goes back to World War II, and that's where they were monitoring all incoming and outgoing telexes and the Western Union-type telegraphs that they were sending into and out of the country. They were compiling those under a program called Shamrock, and that was running at NSA from the end of World War II up to 1975. So this is nothing new. It's just that they have never put together effective ways of overseeing it and monitoring it and making sure it doesn't happen.
You know, take us inside the National Security Agency, and I would assume at some level the same things are going on at CIA and some others. But how is it determined what issues are important to them, and so therefore which individuals, which groups, which resources are we going to go and try to either spy on or gather intelligence on? And then ultimately, I think a lot of us would like to know, what are they going to do with it? What ultimately are they going to do with information about Bill Binney?
Okay, sure. Most of the requirements for intelligence, especially foreign intelligence, comes from various departments of the government: Department of Defense, Commerce, Treasury, State Department. You know, all the departments put together a list of national intelligence requirements. And those get translated into the different intelligence community agencies' requirements list. Like, for example, NSA would put together the National SIGINT requirements list that would meet the national requirements list. And they would subdivide that down by topic and country and so on, and then that would get parsed out internally as to how they would do, who would work on it and who would report on it. But when it came to the domestic spying, this requirement came directly out of the White House. Bush, Cheney, and their associates in the White House, plus Plus, Hayden and Tennant were a part of it, so that was where that requirement originated from. And from there, it was all compartmented, so it was very restricted, and only so many people knew about it to begin with. It's getting more and more exposure, of course, these days, but at that time, there were maybe only a couple hundred, and eventually no more than 2,000, I think, people were involved in that in all the agencies and around the government of time. So it's a question of limited access was what it was then, because it was a highly sensitive activity, simply because it was, of course, an impeachable act. That was something that Bush and Cheney should have been impeached for.
How did, and again, there are moments in time, undoubtedly, whether it's a world war or any war being fought, unique circumstances happening, such as the civil rights movement, the peace movement, so to speak, of the late 60s. Those you would sort of, unfortunately, logically think in American society, those might be the kinds of triggers and those high-profile individuals. Tell us what did, as you were there, what did 9/11 do to the psyche of the American intelligence community overall?
Well, I think initially, at least in the workforce, not necessarily in management. Management saw it as that is senior management at NSA. They would make comments like this was a gift to NSA because of the now all the funding they would get to attack it. They looked at it as a gift, whereas the workforce looked at it as absolute failure. They were completely depressed, I know, and it was really depressing to have failed on such a scale. So those were the two different views of that event. Management looked at it like it was a positive thing, because now we can do a lot more. The Congress will give us so much more money. We can do all kinds of things now. So that's exactly what they did. They expanded into domestic spying first, and then went around the world collecting information on everybody. And the point is, they can use that as leverage against anyone, like we talked earlier about J. Edgar Hoover. Well, this is J. Edgar Hoover on super steroids. J. Edgar Hoover had knowledge of and leverage on several thousands of people. Here you've got several billions. What J. Edgar Hoover was doing is an infinitesimal of what's happening now.
You know, I don't know that there's any direct polling on this, but from where you sit, and maybe from where I sit even, I don't hear this brought up a lot, like people losing sleep over it, although I do know when people hear about specific incidences, they do react with quite frankly, they're very disturbed about it and frankly ashamed of the government.
Yes, and it's like, for example, when they put John Kiriakou in jail for exposing torture and gave amnesty to all those who committed torture. That's a national disgrace. So yeah, I know a lot of people, as long as it doesn't affect them, they don't think there's something bad going on. But when they come for you, you'll think it's bad.
And another thing, I don't really want to politicize this, but did you notice any differences in the approach to activity like what we've been talking about here between different administrations?
Absolutely not. In fact, each administration in turn has made it even more invasive. Like, for example, now, that's why they had to build the Bluffdale facility outside of Utah, out there outside of Salt Lake. That was to hold all the additional things they've been doing since the last administration. So they're even making it worse.
Well, again, if you just joined us, we're talking to Bill Binney. He, for many years, was a high-level official with the National Security Agency. He has formed a new organization called Exposed Facts. He is very concerned about your privacy and mine. Bill, let's talk now about Exposed Facts, or Expose Facts. Tell us about it, and tell us what the mission is.
Well, the mission is try to help whistleblowers and help facilitate whistleblowers getting information out. That's the basic idea. Because unless you have whistleblowers, you will not have knowledge of what the government's doing, or even in corporation. I mean, this extends into corporations too. It's not just government. Normally, the reaction by corporations and government is if you have a whistleblower, what they try to do is just step on them and abuse them to the point that they'll just keep quiet. Whereas they should be looking at because whistleblowers generally are raising legitimate problems and issues, either legally or in a sense of waste or fraud or abuse, or in the forms of ways to deal with problems better. But instead of looking at it positively and trying to address them, they react in such a way to protect the status quo. Well, in the long run, what that means is they don't solve the problem. They keep having the same problem. They don't address it. It's like an alcoholic. If you can't address the fact that you're an alcoholic, you can't correct it. This is the same here, and this is exactly what our institutions are doing in this country. So this is trying to help facilitate getting that information out so that it can't be controlled and suppressed by these organizations.
From where you sit, Bill, how effective, help, hindrance, or other is the general media?
It hasn't been too terribly in the mainstream media. It hasn't been too terribly good, but in the smaller organizations like some Democracy Now! Or Russia Today, various other Al Jazeera even, they of course try to bring you on to expose this kind of information. But the larger mainstream media is principally not really dealing with it. I mean, the last major one was the public television Frontline documentation that occurred 13th and 20th of May of this year. And they did a fairly good job on that. I thought that was an excellent program.
Do you sort of feel like you've been sort of radicalized as a result of your career with NSA?
In terms of perspective of NSA, having looking at me would probably think I'm a radical.
Yeah.
I would say I'm a radical for the Constitution, not for an organization or a person. That's where my radicalism is placed.
What about? I'm very curious as to what those that you used to work with, those that maybe that are still working there, or those that maybe have gone on, either left the organization, retired, etc. What's their reaction been so far to the work that you've done?
I think most of the retired people that I know or know about me, at least from what I've heard through the different grapevine that I have, so they seem to be very positive. That is, thinking we're doing the right thing. Of course, and that the NSA should not be doing all this domestic spying, because they, of course, worked there for a long time and weren't involved in any of that either. So, and they knew what the use at 18 and the rules for never spy on Americans and so on after the Church Committee. That was really drummed into people. So they feel that way, and certainly I think there's a lot of people in right now who are in government who feel that way too, but feel like they can't do anything because they're being threatened internally. I mean, internal in the government, they've looked at this. If you see something, say something. They're talking about the workforce as they work. So that creates a really, an environment like the Stasi had in East Germany, right, where everybody's watching everyone else. And so that's really destroying productivity and making a terrible work environment.
Do you believe how am I going to phrase this? I guess I would say this. Is it ever possible that some of the organizations like NSA could sort of, so to speak, push back on certain things they're being asked to do? Or do they know to do that simply means you're fired or you lose your funding? Or tell us about that.
Well, I think they have a tendency to, at least the management has a tendency to want to follow orders, like for the president. Like when President Bush asked them wrote an order to do this, I think they just saluted and said, okay, let's do it. The president's orders must be legal, let's do it, I think they follow orders well. I just don't think they use their gray matter to figure out what really how that equates and how that relates to our entire government and how it was set up and the principles of this country.
Bill, okay, we hand you the magic wand. You wave it. Tell us what needs to change and how would the world be different as it relates specifically to human rights, corporate malfeasance, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, we sent in a series of recommendations to the President, also to Congress, and to the members of the EU on things we thought that should be done that would correct the problems at NSA. And two of the main principles there, one was to do a targeted, like NSA had always been saying they're doing a targeted acquisition of information. They're not. They're actually doing a bulk acquisition. But where if you do a targeted acquisition approach, like you're after certain people and their associates or zones of suspicion around them, then you're limiting the amount of information you take in. Well, that automatically gives privacy to everybody else. And then we also had another one that would say we have to have a means of verifying what NSA, CIA, FBI, or anybody else is telling us. And so that requires a separate technical group that was responsible to all of Congress or all of the courts to be able and have all the clearances to be able to go into NSA, sit at any terminal, look at any system, investigate any database, watch and look at all the programs they have, what they're using, to verify that what they're doing and what they say they're doing is really true. You have to have that because we've seen any number of cases where they've been lying to Congress and lying to the public, and they do this openly and arrogantly. And so we need a way of verifying what they're saying. You know, Reagan was saying trust but verify. So far, the courts, the FISA court or the intelligence committees or any of them, all they can do is trust what they're saying. They can't verify it. They need a mechanism to verify it because these people lie through their teeth.
Well, it is a subject that will be debated, and it is a lightning rod for sure, and that is all about whistleblowing. It is all about domestic spying. It is all about the privacy and your rights as an American citizen. We've been talking to Bill Binney. He is the organizer of Exposed Facts. He's a former National Security Agency official. Very strong opinions, not only from his career, but also the work that he's done since. Hey, Bill, how can people find out more about the organization and the work that you're doing?
I think you can go to exposefacts.org and look at it on the web. There's also just Google Exposed Facts, and you can get all kinds of information about it.
Well,
and they have a website out. As it grows, they'll be adding to it. So,
well, very much appreciate your service to the country, and appreciate the perspective that you bring today. And good luck to you, and maybe have you on again sometime.
All right. Thanks very much, Dan.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.